So thanks everybody for joining the Investing in Seconds webinar. So Sherman and I are here to talk to you about seconds. Basically, I was going to ping Sherman with a bunch of questions, and then as we go through here, like feel free to throw questions in the chat or in the Q&A thing. You'll also have an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but some of these you might be able to answer in closer to real time. But first, I'll start with just a couple introductions, and then I'll kill the slides. So I think most of you guys know me. I'm Dan Deppen. So I've been doing notes for about 7, 8 years now, mostly residential notes, and then started doing online training courses in 2019. Actually, it was when the first one came out. And then I came to this with the background as a mechanical engineer in the aerospace industry. I did my MBA, and as we were talking about a little bit before I hit record, um, also a product manager in the tech industry, most recently at Amazon. So I've always focused primarily on firsts, and have just more recently gotten into seconds myself. So this is also a nice opportunity for me to kind of pick Sherman's brain here. So Sherman, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dan. I apologize, everybody, for my lack of, I feel like my parents. My name is Sherman Arnowitz. I'm an astronaut, but mainly I've been dealing in second mortgages, non-performing residential second mortgages all across the nation for about 26 years now. Time flies. And Dan and I have had some hookups in the sense of buying and selling, and I thoroughly respect Dan. And when I decided that I was going to focus more on other ventures, I could think of no one else but Dan to take over and handle the second mortgages, and really give everyone the opportunity to learn about the other opportunity out there in the world of seconds. It's still a very viable business. It's a lucrative business. It's a business that obviously I enjoyed for a very long time. It's a very small world, and the people that you're going to meet in that world, you're going to get to know them, and you're kind of going to weed out pretty quickly the ones you want to do business with and the ones that you don't want to do business with. And tonight we're just going to shoot the shit and talk about firsts and seconds, and what are they similar to one another, what's different about them, advantages, disadvantages, strengths, weaknesses, and what does it really take to handle, in my case, second mortgages. And like I said, I've been doing it for about 26, 27 years, and it's just been fantastic for me.
Cool, thanks. So just to kind of lay out, so this is gonna be more of like an open discussion format tonight. So I've got like a list of questions for Sherman and different things, but we'll probably meander, like some of these we may not even get to. And like I said, as you guys have questions, like feel free to like pop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as we can. And then we'll talk a little bit about at the end, the Building Wealth with Seconds course, which is based on all the stuff that Sherman's built over many years, and some webinar bonuses for that if you stay till the end. So I'll quit sharing the slides for now so we can just kind of chat. And then, so I guess like to start, Sherman, like what originally like drew you to seconds? Like I know for me, like when I tell people I do notes, especially people who like have never heard of them, they're like, how did you get into that? So I'm kind of curious, like how you specifically found second notes and then second position mortgages specifically.
I'm a big believer in the universe, and the story, which is very, very true, is when I graduated college, my best friend and my roommate, we'll call him Steve, called me up. He was in San Diego, and he asked to borrow $5,000. And he promised, it was for a real estate deal, and he promised he would give me back 5,000 plus $1,000 within 30 days. He had to do this deal, real estate deal. And so I gave him the $5,000. God, this is going back maybe 30 years. And I gave him the $5,000 and I never saw the $5,000. He never returned the $5,000. And, the sad part, was I lost 5,000, but sadder is I lost, a best friend. And about 15 years went by and I got a certified check in the mail for $5,000 with Steve's phone number on it. And I called Steve up, and the first thing I said to Steve was, "Well, where's the interest?"
That's what I would
And
have said too. That's what I was thinking.
yeah, exactly. And and so we got to talking, and he's telling me what he was, doing. And at the time, I was selling my share of a completely different business, direct mail and printing business, to my brother. And so he started telling me what he was doing, and he was, keep in mind, this is almost 30 years ago. And he said, I deal with these mortgage companies, banks, and the second mortgages. And um, when borrowers are delinquent and they're giving the banks trouble, the banks would rather sell off these loans to investors than to go through and hire attorneys and this and that. And at the time, there was a lot of equity in these properties. And so I said, oh, well, it's kind of perfect timing because I'm selling my share of the business to my brother. And so Steve started telling me about this business, and he started showing me about this business. And I put up $100,000 with Steve, and he put up 100. And of course, I thought this was like another scam, that he was going to scam me. First, he got me for 5, and then he was going to scam me for 100. But it didn't happen that way. And we bought $200,000 worth of seconds, and he showed me, the formula and why you do this and why you don't do that. And he spent, a lot of time with me showing. And before we knew it, we were just, at the time, since there was so much equity in the properties, if someone gave you trouble, all you had to do was mention the F word, foreclosure, and all of a sudden that would get their attention because there was so much equity. And we did really, really well. And then we decided he'll do West Coast loans. I'll do East Coast loans, since he was in San Diego and I was in New York. And we were working with companies, Chase and the Money Store and Ditech. And there really wasn't, literally, there was probably 5 to 10, maybe, other investors in the United States doing this. So it was
Yeah,
a lot.
so how did he learn how to do it? Like, because that was
Completely by accident. Um, he would tell me the story. He was dealing with these banks, and what he would do in San Diego is he would find an empty lot in a good area. He'd buy the lot, and then he'd find a really nice house in a crummy area. And he would pick up the house and he would move it from the crummy area over to the nice area that he bought the land, the lot for that.
like
And
literally move the house.
he would literally move the house from a crummy neighborhood to a nice neighborhood where he had the property. And so he dealt a lot with banks, and he really stumbled on this. I remember him telling me one story that they were moving the house and they literally put the house on the lot backwards. So that was pretty funny. But he stumbled into this. It wasn't anything that, wow, you're really smart. I can't believe you thought of this. It was just he stumbled into this, and he was just making a killing, an
I,
absolute killing.
yeah, I've got another buddy. Well, I knew him from here in Colorado. He recently retired to Arizona, but he was doing seconds in the late 90s in Colorado. And I'm not sure how he got into it, but he had been doing, he had this, well, he still has kind of this gigantic rental empire, but somehow like in the late 90s, him and his partner had a relationship with one of the banks in Colorado. and they were buying delinquent seconds. And their whole model at the time, he said, all they did was they would buy these and they would just, like you said, the F word, they just mentioned the F word, like you said, they would just send them a letter kind of threatening foreclosure. And most of the time they would pay. And they were getting like such big discounts. It just worked. And they weren't even foreclosing on them. Basically, what happened to them was they kind of got way out over their skis. Like for me, like when I do non-performing first, right, I always make sure I have funds on hand in case I have to foreclose. And like I've had deals that have drug out for a couple years and whatnot. Like they just plowed all their money in it. And he said what happened was after September, he said he still doesn't understand this, but after September 11th happened, for some reason, borrowers just stopped responding to the letters, but they were kind of like tapped out. And so he said they made a bunch of money for a few years and then kind of took it in the shorts at the end and then kind of went back to focusing on rentals. But yeah, I think there's literally like a handful of people doing this like back then.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because for your listeners, um, one thing I realized when I started in the late 90s, yeah, there was lots of equity. And so we developed a strategy based on there being lots of equity. Well, when what happened was when I would create a fund, and a fund to me could be I created funds that were 30 loans, that were 150 loans, 350 loans. So it really didn't matter. And what I would do is I would then go to private investors that I met along the way and I cultivated along the way. And if it was 75 loans, and that was $500,000. I would approach the private investors and explain, do my dog and pony show, and hey, you know, oh, you'll give 50, you'll give 35, you'll give 100, blah blah blah, until I got everything together. You know, and it's a different strategy. So obviously, I bought in 2006, I think, uh, 75 loans, and obviously there was tremendous equity then. And
Mm-hmm.
we bought them, and then all of a sudden we started working them, and then all of a sudden 2008 came along, and stuff that there was tremendous equity. You know, if we bought a $40,000 second mortgage, and they owed the first, let's say 100, and they owed the second 40, so that's 140. The house was worth $250,000 when we bought it. Not a problem. Well, 2008 came along, and that $250,000 was now at $125,000 value. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my point being is that when this stuff happens, you have to be prepared to pivot as quickly as possible. So we did as much as we could. We made deals with the borrowers, and so I think they got back maybe 80%. My investors got back maybe 80% of what they invested, which I'm kind of pretty proud of. We did another pool of loans where I don't know, it might have been like 125. And what I was looking at the reports is, wow, look at this. There's like 80% of those borrowers are paying. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, that sounds great. But then when I dove a little deeper, I looked and I saw, wait a second, based on the amount that we're getting every month from these people, it's going to take us like 12 years to get our money back. And what I saw was that the people that were working with me, they were making deals with these borrowers. Oh, you owe $500 a month? You can't afford $500 a month? What could you afford? Oh, you can afford $100 a month? Okay, we'll put you down for $100 a month. So when I did my analysis in looking to buy these loans, I wasn't naive in looking and saying, okay, they're going to pay 100% of what the monthly is going to be, because when you deal with seconds, you can wheel and deal. You know, if I'm paying 30 35 cents on the dollar, I have wiggle room that I could
Mm-hmm.
say, Okay, you can't pay $500 a month. I tell you what, why don't you pay $300 a month? All right. But when you're going from 500 down to $100 a month, that's troublesome because you're, like I said, it's going to take so long to get your money back. And so that's the thing where you have to be able in this business to kind of look at what you're doing, things that you might initially were doing on your due diligence, where you're calculating all of this. Along the way, you have to be smart in looking what's happened on a month to month, loan by loan basis, as well as globally at all those loans. And that's when we decided, wait a second, we've got to sell off a lot of this and as fast as we can. So,
Mm-hmm.
I know, and you could talk about and tell me because I'm not that savvy on first, but when you're buying a loan, a first mortgage loan, you don't have the comfort with that wiggle room, do you?
Well, you've got some, you've typically got less if it's a non-performer. So you're still getting it at a discount, and there's
Right.
probably also arrearages, but market conditions fluctuate, but it's not going to be 35%, right? It's going to be something a whole lot more than that. So you've got less room. Then there's all kinds of different ways to play non-performing first. Like when I buy them, I'm trying to buy ones where borrower's still in the property. They've made some number of payments in the last year. And so I know I've got a pretty good probability of getting them to repay. Like I have a specific model and I've collected data on it, like how they've gone. And so about 2/3 I'll get to reperform if I buy the model. Then the other third I'm foreclosing. And then, the big risk factor for me is always what the condition of the inside is afterwards, right? And I've had some where it turned out the inside was great and it was like a smashing home run. And then I've had others where it was a mess and I've gotten upside down. So it's always a little bit of a numbers game. So you've got some wiggle room, but not as much as you should have in the seconds for sure.
And I think someone told me, which is on my part is true, when you're dealing with first mortgages, your main focus is the house, the value of the house, what's going on with the house. When you're dealing with seconds, yes, it's about the house, but it's more about the person. What's happening with the person?
Mm-hmm.
What's the credit rating? What are they working? How long have they been in the house? Are there medical bills? So we look at a whole lot of the person rather than just okay. The first, if it's a $300,000 house and I buy it for 250, what am I able to do? What am I not able to do? What's the market like? What's the rental market like? That's pretty much it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Like for me, and people have different models for first. Some people do care about the borrower on first. I personally don't. Like my attitude is if it's a non-performing first, I know the borrower has bad credit, like because it's not performing. And basically they're either going to want to stay or they're not. And I've done enough of them that I've never been able to come up with like a formula to predict the borrower that's going to want to stay versus they don't. Honestly, a lot of what happens is like I'm buying these at a discount. I've got some wiggle room and all of mine are out of state. So like I'm going out of my way to keep the borrower in there. So when I foreclose, it's kind of the last resort, right? So for me, what oft not always, but what often happens is the kind of borrower that rides the ship down in that either they're just a really bad borrower. Like I've had borrowers that do things that aren't even rational, or sometimes it means the house is really messed up. Like the roof is bad. I had one where like there's a crack in the foundation. I had one where it was in Indiana. I was going through foreclosure. I was never able to make contact with the borrower, right? At all. And we're going through the foreclosure process. It takes a little time. We're getting like up to the end, and the borrower calls me on the phone and he goes, "Hey, we're moving out." And he had this weird story. He's like, "Yeah, I'm going by." I'm like, "Okay." Well, it turned out the furnace had broken and we were getting into winter. So like the furnace broke and then he bailed. So for me, a lot of times borrower behavior often is determined by, like, did something break in the property? So yeah, to your point, like I just don't focus on that as much. If I had a better form, maybe that's something we can do with AI. Like maybe we can build some AI models to predict that better, and then I'll look at it closer. But yeah, not quite there yet.
What was the biggest surprise when you did buy something that you found expense wise?
Oh, the biggest was actually it was in the same town as that other deal with the guy with the furnace. I had a legit hoarder house. We got in there and it was waist deep trash. So it was about an 1,800 square foot house, and it required 4 40-yard dumpsters
Oh my
to
gosh.
pull everything out. And that was my worst deal. I still haven't had the stomach like to put together a case study on it. But like, so I got it cleaned out, and I was getting quotes for like over $10,000 for the clean out. I'm like, this is insane. And I ended up like hiring some guys on Craigslist and ordering the dumpsters and doing it for like a couple thousand. And then the bones of the house were kind of okay. So like that was good because I didn't know what I was going to find. And then I attempted to rehab my way out of it, which did not go well. So basically what happened was I had an offer. I could have sold it as is, right? Like right from the start after I got it cleaned out. I would have lost like 19,000, or no, I would have lost $20,000. And then I went down this rehab thing, and that was this whole like odyssey of terribleness. And I ended up losing like 19,000 in the end after a lot more heartburn. So that was my biggest surprise and my worst deal. So
You know, I'm trying to think. We had a house, second mortgage in New Mexico, and tried for a long time, skip tracing, and nothing really happened. And we had it probably for about a year, and we got a phone call from the DEA, literally the DEA. And they said,
mhm.
Do you own this house? I said, no, we own the second mortgage. And they said, well, we have to confiscate it because this house was purchased with drug money. And so I said, okay, do you have something you can send? And they sent the court order and stuff. And, you know, the good news with seconds, I mean, it was a crappy thing. The good news with seconds is, you know, you can buy a second from $5,000 up to $300,000. You know, the unpaid principal balance is from 5,000 up to whatever. My world has always been from like $10,000 up to about $60,000 UPB. I once bought a $100,000 second mortgage, and even though I paid, I don't know, let's say I paid $30,000 on that. It came push to shove. I think there was going to be a loan modification, and the senior lien was telling us, "Hey, we'll give you $8,000. That's the most that Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac allows us to give you." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to accept it." And he said, if you don't accept it, that's fine. But what's going to happen is the house isn't worth anything. And so you're going to spend more money to try to get more, you know, legal money or what have you to try to get
Mhm.
more. And so I really was between a rock and a hard place. It's either accept the $8,000 and I lost whatever I lost, you know, 20,000 or whatever, or say no to them and stick my tongue out at them. And then now what? I'm going to have to foreclose, but it's not worth foreclosing because it's underwater. So it really
Mhm.
was between a rock and a hard place. And that was my lesson, to learn to say, you don't want, when you're looking at a pool of loans in the second mortgage space, you really want to look at the risk reward. And for me, I felt safe in that my center target was UPB's 25 to $50,000. That was my
Mhm.
prime center point, because I knew at $50,000, if I did 20 cents on the dollar, it was $10,000. And I would be very selective of that. So, you know, in the course, we go through the permutations of step one, this is what you do. And really what we're looking to do is if we're starting that, we're looking at, let's say, 40-second mortgages, we go through that process of elimination and we take it one step, one logical step at a time. So for instance, I'm going to look at this loan, this portfolio of 40 loans, and I'm going to say, okay, any seconds that are over $60,000, get rid of them. I don't want them. Anything, let's say, I didn't even mind $5,000 unpaid principal balance because they were kind of good to just play around with. So my world would be, let's say, $5,000 to $60,000. And then what I would do is I would go through and I'd say, okay, are there any BK 13s? I didn't mind bankruptcy 7s, but the 13s, you get burned on those. And so get rid of the BK 13s. And then what I would do is I would say, okay, now I want you to get rid of any home where the value of the home is under $100,000. And my thinking with that is that if you've ever seen a home under $100,000, the challenge there is, oh, you needed your air conditioner broke, and now you need another five. They're going to spend $5,000 on the air conditioner, and they're not going to be concerned about the second mortgage. So if something happens to the house, they're really not going to come. They're really not going to care about the second mortgage. Yeah, in their mind, they'll be more worried about the first mortgage, but kind of the second mortgage, they're not going to have the same kind of worry. So as we go through this process, then we get down to, I would look and I'd say, okay, well, what about the FICO score? To me, the FICO score was a great tool, great ammunition. Because I would look after I kind of got rid of these, and let's say out of 40, I had, let's say, 20 left. I would look, well, what's the credit score? Somebody in the second mortgage space that has good credit, that's a valuable indicator for me. Even though the property is underwater, we're living at a time where 90+% of the properties are underwater. You have to take that as a given. So even though the property's underwater, let's just put that aside for right now. Here I'm looking at a person that's got a 675, a 700 score credit score. Then I'd look and I'd say, how many years has the person been living there? Look at this, the guy's been living there for 15 years. That's another indicator. The FICO score is a great indicator. How long they've been living there is another great indicator. If you can find on the credit report that they are working, that's another great indicator. So those are ones that out of the 20 left that I will take a chance with. And so, in the course, we kind of set it up as that kind of training. And if you will, imagine you have pluses and minuses. Not only do you have pluses and minuses that you're moving them over to the side, each side of that, but there's also in the back of your head, there's a scoring that's going on. Certainly if somebody is current with their first mortgage, but they're not current second, that's a hell of a lot more important to me than them living there for 15 years. Them living there for 15 years is a plus, and that goes on the right side of the paper, just like them being current with their first goes on the right-hand side of the paper. But if I was scoring it, the score for them being current with their first would probably be 25 points, where them being in the place for 15 years might be 5 points. So you have to be realistic about that. And so you kind of in the back of your head, you're kind of right side of the paper, left side of the paper, and you're kind of assigning points or values to that. And the ultimate is that once you get it down to, out of those 40, that you get it down to the 15, then what you want to do is you want to sort them out to say, I want to grade A's, B's, and C's out of these remaining 15. And out of the A's, I'm willing to take, if let's say out of the 15, let's say for argument's sake, there were 5 A's and 5 B's, 5 C's. Out of the 5 A's, I'm willing to take a risk, a really big risk on 2 of them. So I'll go outside of my comfort zone on 2 of those 5. The remaining three, I'm going to be baseline of what I would normally pay for a good loan. If let's say I would normally pay at the time 35 cents on the dollar, that I'd pay 35 cents on the dollar for three of those A's. And the two A's that I'm going to take a risk, I might go instead of 35, I might go 45 cents on the dollar for those two, because I really felt those were worth it. And they were kind of like the cream of the crop.
Quick question, Sherman, somebody had. So what do you define as good credit? Like, what's your threshold for like a good credit score?
We mark it up in the course. I would probably say anybody from a 700, anybody from a 700 and above. You know, you could go a little more finite and say 750 above is excellent. 700 to 750 is very good. 650 to 700 is good. 575 to 650 is fair, and anything under 650 is not so great.
I'm not sure I've ever had a borrower over 650, or not too many of them, but
there's not that many, but I do find those, we call them outliers, and there are outliers out there that that for whatever reason, and what's interesting also is, let's say I do buy those, and now I've skip trace, or I'm ready to skip trace, and I get the person's information and I get them on the phone. The way that I'm going to talk to them also is based on what their credit score is. I'm not saying that somebody with a 650 is dumb. I'm just saying my conversation with somebody who has a 700 credit score, he's upside down. He's been in the place for over 10 years. He's current with the first. I'm going to have a different conversation with that person.
Well, that person probably has a much different level of financial literacy.
Yes.
Like when I've had some conversations with borrowers where I've been horrified at how they just didn't understand like how the world works. Like I had a borrower once, like he legitimately didn't understand he was supposed to send in a specific amount every month. He would just send in like a couple $100 when he had them. And then once he understood that, he was fine. Yeah.
You know, I remember, if you remember on one of the Seinfeld episodes, George is complaining that he needs to get hand. You got to have hand, you know,
I don't remember that one. Yeah.
The idea is that he was dating somebody, his girlfriend, and he didn't have the upper hand. So that's what he was referring to, that he didn't have hand. She had more hand than he had. And so he didn't have much to argue about. He didn't have anything to argue about. He didn't have anything. And so, you know, I approach these borrowers to say to myself, do I have hand? If so, how much hand do I have? Or do I not have hand? You know, going into this and seeing that there's no equity, they're not current with the first, they've been living in the property for 2 years. So there's not that much emotional equity because they've only been there for 2 years. They're not paying, they're not paying their first. You know, they have bad credit. So going in and speaking with that person, I don't have hands. So my conversation is going to be, hi, John. This is who I am. Let's see if we can work this out. What are your intentions, John? I would always start with, what are your intentions? It kind of scares a little bit or intimidates the person. What do you mean? What do you mean? What are my intentions? Well, are your intentions to stay in the house or not stay in the house? And so that gives you an indication. If somebody says, well, no, I want to stay in the house. Okay, we're different. We want to work with you. How can we work this together where we're both going to come out feeling like we both have benefited? And so you kind of take it with that. And so you kind of know, look, if this guy is $200 a month, he's not current with the first, there's not equity in the place, what am I doing? You know, what do I think I can get out of this person if he's supposed to pay me $200 a month? Hey, John, I know that your second mortgage, you owe us $30,000 and it's $250 a month. Are you able to pay that on a regular? Do you think you're able to pay that on a regular basis? Um, no, I'm not going to be able to pay that on a regular basis. Well, here's a couple options. You know, are you able to borrow money from some people? So my point is that, you know, whether you have hands or you don't have hands, each situation is different. I don't know with the first, and you could tell me in the world of first mortgages that you have so many different stories, so many different opportunities. You know, it's not intimidating, it's not rocket science, but if I could tell you that there's probably 12 different permutations in the second mortgage space. And so
Hmm.
I don't know, do you have that in the first or it's
Yeah,
fairly
no, it's kind of similar. So, typically I do something very similar where I reach out to the borrower and I ask, I don't say it quite the same way you do, but I say, but I like that. I wrote that down. I just say, what are your plans for this? Like, what do you plan on doing with it? And then if they want to stay in the house, I'll ask them like, well, can you make payments? What's going on? I try to get the backstory. A lot of times what happens is if the borrower wants to stay, it's often, medical bills, divorce, job loss that like cause them to get behind. And then those are problems that are generally like recoverable after some amount of months. So a lot of times
right?
people are in the place where they're like, well, I can start paying now, but they got behind and then maybe the other lender they couldn't even talk to, so they weren't sure what to do, so they stopped paying. So if it's that kind of situation, then I'll propose basically to say, hey, generally I'll try to get a good faith down payment. And then whether I can do that or not, I'll put them on a trial payment plan. Say, hey, just demonstrate you can make payments 6 or 12 months. These days I've gone more for 12. And then I'll reset the loan. Then I'll say, okay, I'll just take all your payments behind then. We'll move them to the back of the loan. So then you'll be current. So they have them a path to be current. I'm generally not, I'm rarely reducing payments. I did that once actually, just very recently, but that was kind of a corner case. Um, but then I have had other deals that were unique. Like I had one where the borrower was a serial BK filer. It had had a HAMP modification. She was way behind. This lady was like total deadbeat, never going to pay. And because of the HAMP mod, like I didn't want her to reinstate and pay. That would be a fiasco. And so that was another unique one where I went into it where it was basically like no deals beyond cash for keys. Like I was not entertaining another deal. So there are some variations, but generally I'm trying to do some kind of trial payment plan and then move arrearages to the back of the loan and just get them paying. Because for me, like I said, I don't all my stuff is out of state. I don't want an REO. That always stinks.
Mhm.
Oh, so there was a question. Yeah, so it's actually a HAMP mod, HAMP. That was I forget what that stands for. And I don't know if those are even around, but they were basically like loan modification programs that banks would do where like this one, it set the interest rate on the loan all the way down like to 2%. Um, yeah. So you still may see a few of those floating around, but
Yeah, you have to decide when you get into the second mortgage space, what kind of what kind of investor do you want to be? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I know a lot of investors that they'll buy loans, and they won't make one phone call. They would just start foreclosing on all of them.
mhm.
And so, you know, whether they have a deal with lawyers and, you know, maybe it's $3,000 to $5,000 that they're going to pay, um, you know, and they're just going to it's going to be fireworks right from the beginning. Shock and awe. That's what I wanted to say. And I'm not sure how successful or not successful it is. Obviously, it works because I know people that are doing it. And that's fine. Um, my position is, particularly in the heyday, most of these people in the second mortgage space, they've been shitted on so much. And whether, the great debate is, particularly with the 2008 debacle, are you going to blame the broker and the bank that said, yeah, we're going to pay you, we're going to allow this guy to take a $300,000 mortgage when he's making $75,000 a year? Or are you going to blame the borrower? Why would you think that you could afford a $300,000 mortgage when you're paying $75,000 a year? So, you know, I think at some point it becomes irrelevant, but for the most part, these people have been shit on. And so our position has always been, look, I'm here to help you. I understand the position that you're in, and I'm here to work with you, and I'm here to help you. And I want to see both of us. I'm here to help you get from A to B, and we could do this together. And the only reason why I could say that is because when I bought the loans, I bought smart, and I followed the due diligence that I created, and I separated out, like I was talking before, what kind of loans do I have hand, do I not have hand? When you buy, a lot of times when you buy from a bank or a hedge fund or a large investor, they'll say to you, you can't cherry pick. You can't do onesies, twosies, threesies. You know, I might be able to say, all right, I just want anything under 50,000, or I might be able to say, I want it in this region, but that's about all that they're going to do. We bought from PNC Bank about 400 loans, and they didn't really give us much flexibility as to what we could and could take. So you have to realize, if you're not cherry picking, in that group of loans, there's going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And so it's just a matter of what you want to do as an investor, the route that you want to go. My feeling is that if I give this person a chance and I go A through Z, I'll get to X, which is going to be, if the stars align, will foreclose. I'd say out of the thousands and thousands of loans that we purchased at Keyhole, honestly, we've probably foreclosed on 10 people. That's it. I rather do nothing with the loan and then maybe sell the loan to somebody else, then unless it just makes sense and there's enough equity and just everything's right about it. And out of thousands of thousands, we could have foreclosed more, but it just worked that's what it was.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key differences between firsts and seconds. Like, I have known people with that model for first where they're like, we won't foreclose, we'll try to work them out, and if it doesn't work, we'll just resell the loan or whatever. What I like to do on first is I don't buy anything unless I'm willing to foreclose, because it enforces a certain level of discipline on myself and the due diligence. And then I've had a bunch of borrowers who reinstate like at the last possible minute. Like, some of them are crazy. The borrower won't make a $400 payment, and then they cough up like $7,000 at the last minute, and I wouldn't have gotten that. The flip side is I get deals like the one I mentioned, right? We end up foreclosing, and then there's all the challenges that go with that. But I don't think that model of like, I'm not going to buy unless I foreclose would really work. I'm guessing if you tried to apply that for seconds, you probably wouldn't buy a lot of seconds. It would just probably narrow the window of what you were willing to do.
I agree with that. You have to take all things into consideration. What I tell people looking to get into seconds is, whether you're dealing with 5 loans, 50 loans, or 500 loans, here's what's going to happen. Out of the 5 loans, you're going to have 2 loans that are going to start making payments. You found the person, you skip traced them, you prove to them that you rightfully, legally own the loans. Rarely, if it's $40,000 and it's $500 a month, rarely are you going to get somebody to say, okay, I'll pay the $500 a month. So they're going to start paying, but they're probably going to pay $350 a month. And what we say to those people is, look, like you said, Dan, we're going to put you on a temporary 6-month program, and we'll do it at $300 a month. And if you're able to pay $300 a month for 6 months without being late, without missing a payment, we can talk about doing a loan modification.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like for the borrower to either like demonstrate that they'll pay, like you're talking about there. That's why I like to get a good faith down payment so they have skin in the game. Because one thing is like if you call up a borrower who's behind and you go, hey, can you start making smaller payments and I won't foreclose? They'll go, yeah, sure, you got it. You know, and that you don't really have anything there. You're gonna waste a lot of time.
Yeah, there's little. So out of those 5, you're going to get 2 that are going to start paying. And then most of them do the temp arrangement. Most of them we do a loan modification. Out of the remaining 3, you're probably going to get 1 that's going to say, I don't want to have a second mortgage anymore. I want to pay it off. What will you take to pay it off? So you negotiate and you go back and forth. And then out of the 2 remaining loans, you're probably going to have 1 loan where the borrower says, screw off, I'm not paying you anything. Even $75 a month? Nope, I'm not going to pay anything. And at that point, you really have to reevaluate the loan and look at the loan a little bit closer to determine, do you have hands or you don't have any hands? And depending what that answer is, I might have to fold up that loan and put it in the shelf and close that closet until some later point. Or if you have some hands, you might want to start bluffing a little bit. And then the last of the 5, I call it a wild card. It could be any of those. And you know, whether it's 5, 50, or 500, those same percentages are going to happen. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I would always equate it to a big swimming pool. And all of a sudden, if I bought 50 loans and I was able to get 10 of those performing, and those 10 total $3,000 a month, great, throw it in the pool. I was able to get 7 of them to do a payoff, and that totaled 113,000. Throw it in the pool. But there was another 7 that out of the 7, 5 of them were foreclosed on by the first mortgage, and there was no surplus, nothing left over. Okay, that's minus X. Throw it in the pool. Where are we so far in the pool? Well, you're up $62,000, and you've got $3,500 coming in on a monthly basis. So that's the way that you look at it. You know, out of that grouping, what's the net based on the performance of all of those loans?
Yeah, it's a numbers game, right? Like
Total
I
number.
think for me, like before coming into notes, so back in the early 2000s, I was way into poker for a while. Like actually like wrote a book on it and got into all the math, right? And so you get used to that being a numbers game. It's like, okay, you know, under this situation, I'm going to win X percentage of the time and lose. So, you know, you get used to like, okay, the odds are in my favor. I'm going to win 90% of the time, but I'm going to lose sometimes. Whereas I think like some people get very anchored on, they want to know, okay, I want to do an analysis up front and then what's going to happen. And don't really know what's going to happen. Like you kind of know like probabilities to your point. You kind of know like, okay, out of the 5, okay, 2 are going to do this and 1's probably going to do that. But you can't like look at one loan and pinpoint it and go, okay, this is exactly how it's going to go down because you don't know. And then there's human beings you're dealing with.
And there's analysis paralysis also. You know, you can't be for the faint of heart. I would do with my students that they could do a personal mentorship. And the personal mentorship is they would commit to buying 5 mortgages, second mortgages, and you know, we would help them, and we would work with them one-on-one. They had to buy 5, and we would split the profits 50-50. And out of let's say 30, 40 students that I was doing it during a certain period of time, There were some students that they were 4 for 5. Very few did you have 5 for 5, and there were some that were 1 for 5.
Yeah.
There's no prediction, but yet, like poker, it's the odds. And when we do our due diligence, we're trying to do the due diligence, that process of elimination, to increase our odds, to give us the greatest odds based on eliminating the potential dangers.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, that's probably a pretty decent stopping point. So I'll get to the end where I directly talk about seconds and due diligence. Let me go back to sharing the screen. So we kind of talked a little bit about the course that came out at the end of last year. So there's this whole course that Sherman built on building wealth in second position notes. And so, this is basically for folks actually kind of like me in a way where, you're already doing other investing either in first or other kinds of notes or real estate, and you want to add buying seconds to your toolkit. It's really nice for just like it's helped me in opening the aperture on the number of deals that I can look at and take down. And then sometimes these are smaller value. Like one of the things that attracts people to seconds sometimes is they can get started with a smaller dollar amount. They're not always as large as the first. But I would say, and they're also for people who are ready to get going, this year and really take action. Basically there's 28 chapters altogether covering A to Z on second position notes. So it goes through all the where to do the sourcing, due diligence, talks about credit reports, foreclosures, bankruptcies, how to do these deals and load modifications, and quite a bit more. And then for folks attending the webinar, so I've got a couple bonuses if people want to pick the course up now. So one of the things, so I've kind of taken over the course from Sherman, although we're still obviously advising and involved. But one of the things that I'm starting, and for people who have done the course, are live group calls. And the next one's going to be in about 3 weeks on Monday, the 22nd. These will probably turn into a monthly cadence. I don't want to quite commit to that yet, just depending on summer plans, but I plan on doing these on a regular basis. I just did one recently for folks who had done the Note Launchpad course. That went real well. So this is an opportunity for folks who are members of the course, to get question answered as they go along, to get help or ask questions if they're working through a specific deal. And then it's also a nice mechanism for me to share new sources that I found or new content that I'm working on adding to the course. And then the second one is you get a free private coaching call that I'll do. So I will, shoot, where's my link? Calendly. Let me share a couple of links with you in the chat. I always forget to do this. So there's the link to the course itself. And then when you sign up the course, I've got a Calendly link, and I'll send this to you after you get the course as well, where you can schedule a coaching session. And so you can use that for whatever you want. So that just may be general questions about the course. You could save that until you're into the course and have more detailed questions, or you could save it for a while till you're all the way through the course and now you're doing a deal and there's something specific that you want help on. And then the third one is the reduced payment option. So one of the things I found doing courses for a while, I was always offered a full pay price and then some sort of payments, whether it's 3, 4, sometimes 6 payments. And the way I've always set it up is if you do the right, you get a discount for doing the full pay typically, and then it, that net costs more if you do the payments. But I found even though it costs more, a lot of people like doing the payments. So what we're offering here is you can do 4 payments for $625, which is basically the same price as the normal full pay of the $24.97. So what you're essentially getting is the payment option, but as the same price as the full pay. It's kind of a long-winded explanation. I probably could have made that more simple, but that's what it is. And then the big one is you also throwing in, if you do this tonight, the systematic due diligence course. So this was a course I created a couple years ago. Now there is a lot of information in here that overlaps with the seconds course, but it has a little bit of a different spin on it. And it's got like 30 modules all dedicated on due diligence. So this course has been out for a few years, has been really well received. Normally sells for $495. And so in addition to the lower payment option, you also get that included. And if you've already, if you bought the course, like when we first launched it and you're on the webinar tonight, give me a holler and I can give you access to the course as well. But it's broken up into 5 sections. So there's the overview, pre-bid due diligence, post-bid due diligence, a lot of other miscellaneous topics, including doing due diligence on the sellers themselves. You know, it's a small world, and a lot of times it's helpful to know who you're dealing with. So to kind of recap, you know, we got a couple bonuses. So basically the payment plan, the private coaching, the group calls, and the systematic due diligence. So that's what I've got for you tonight. And then if you wanted to check out more info on the due diligence course itself, there's the link to the curriculum. And so I know people kind of asked questions as we got along, but any other questions before we give it a wrap? I hope Sherman didn't fall down. I see the carpet, so I hope you're okay.
Wait,
But
there you go.
all
There you
right,
go. So,
no worries. All right, well, Sherman, thanks again for doing this again. I really appreciate it. So it's
it's
always
always a
fun to get to
pleasure.
pick your brain on this stuff. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it also. I learned a bit more about first mortgages also, so thank you.
all
And
right,
thank you everybody for coming and visiting, and I hope you all appreciate and learn something.
all right, everybody, have a good night. It's not.